Look at a spiral galaxy. Now look at a cyclone. Now look at the shell of a snail. They do not share the same material, they do not share the same scale, they do not share the same origin. And yet, the shape returns. A spiral, a hexagon, a branch, a lattice, a wave. If the universe were only random collision, why would order appear so often? Not everywhere, not perfectly, but often enough to make us ask, is form something the universe builds, or is form something the universe filters? This is the question at the center of this episode, not whether ancient geometry proves modern physics, not whether sacred symbols contain a secret code, but something more careful and perhaps more powerful. Why do some patterns survive while others disappear? In the first part of this journey, we stood near a silent origin. Lao Tzu called it the Tao. Modern physics speaks in a different language, but it also searches for deep limits where symmetry has not yet broken into the world we know. In the second part, we entered the mystery of two, visible and hidden, manifest and unmanifest, one face of reality and the face behind it. But a universe made only of two sides would still be incomplete. It would have tension, it would have contrast, but it would not yet have form. If reality were only light and shadow, open and hidden, positive and negative, then everything might remain locked in frozen opposition. A perfect balance can be beautiful, but perfect balance can also be silent. Nothing moves, nothing grows, nothing differentiates. Something else must happen. The two sides must begin to relate. They must form a stable difference, a rhythm, a boundary, a pattern that can repeat without collapsing. This is where the old sentence becomes powerful. 2 gives birth to 3. 3 gives birth to the 10,000 things. In this episode, we will treat that 3 not as a magic number, but as a bridge from opposition to relation, a bridge from relation to pattern, a bridge from pattern to world. Before humans wrote equations, we drew geometry, pyramids, mandalas, circles, spirals, platonic solids. Across civilizations, people seemed to sense that the world was not pure chaos. There were shapes that returned, ratios that felt balanced, patterns that appeared in temples, plants, shells, storms, and stars. Today, we often call this sacred geometry, but we must be careful. Sacred geometry is not evidence for modern physics. It is not a substitute for measurement, calculation, or experiment. It is better understood as an ancient notebook of pattern intuition, a record of the human suspicion that nature has preferred forms. The value of sacred geometry is not that it gives us final answers. Its value is that it asks a very good question. Why does nature keep finding certain shapes? Take the spiral. It appears in shells, cyclones, galaxies, and growing plants. But the important point is not that all spirals share one secret origin. They do not. A shell is not a storm. A storm is not a galaxy. A galaxy is not a plant. The mechanisms are different, but similar constraints can lead to similar forms: growth, rotation, flow, pressure, gravity, boundary. A spiral is often what happens when change moves outward while still remembering a center. That is the power of geometry. It turns motion into shape. Now take the hexagon. A snowflake does not choose beauty. It follows molecular constraints. Water molecules bond in ways that favor sixfold symmetry. Temperature, humidity, and tiny fluctuations then sculpt the final crystal. Nature does not need a mystical designer to produce astonishing form. Sometimes, form appears because only certain arrangements can remain stable. The pattern is not imposed from outside. It emerges from rules, materials, energy flow, and conditions. Geometry is the visible memory of constraint. So we can now ask the question more sharply. Not, does sacred geometry prove the universe has a hidden message? But, why do stable shapes appear at all? Why does matter not remain as featureless noise? Why do some patterns survive, while others fade almost immediately? Physics gives one of its deepest answers through resonance. A guitar string does not produce every possible sound. Its length matters. Its tension matters. Its fixed ends matter. Most vibrations cancel. Only certain frequencies remain. This is the first clue. Resonance is not just vibration. Resonance is selection. A system does not keep every possible motion. It keeps the motions that can survive its boundaries. So perhaps form is not only assembled, perhaps form is filtered. Unstable patterns fade. Stable patterns remain. The clearest image is a Chladni plate, a thin metal plate, a layer of sand, a bow drawn across the edge. At first, the sand is scattered, then the plate begins to vibrate. The sand is thrown away from the moving regions. It settles along the quiet lines, the nodes, and suddenly disorder becomes geometry. Not because the sand understands the pattern, not because a symbol has commanded it, but because the system allows only certain still points to remain. This is the visual heart of the episode. Pattern is what survives the motion. This idea appears in many forms. In acoustic systems, standing waves reveal allowed modes. In quantum systems, symmetry and boundary conditions restrict which patterns can exist. On curved surfaces, spherical harmonics describe allowed variations. In topology, some structures survive because their twisting cannot be easily undone. These are not the same mechanism. A drum plate is not an atom. An atom is not a galaxy. A galaxy is not a living cell. But they share a disciplined lesson. Reality is not a stage where every possibility lasts. Reality filters. Stable modes remain. Unstable modes disappear. Now we can return to PTQ. In the PT-symmetric quaternionic spacetime perspective, the world we observe can be imagined as a projected slice of a deeper geometric structure. One useful word in that discussion is epsilon. Here, epsilon must not be treated as magic energy. It is not a spiritual force. It is not a confirmed new field. In this episode, epsilon is best understood as projection residue, a difference left behind when deeper structure is represented in the observable world. A mismatch, a trace, a boundary-like remnant of projection. For visualization, we may imagine this residue as affecting the conditions of a cosmic resonance plate. But this is a metaphor, not a literal plate, not a literal sound, not a claim that PTQ has already been experimentally proven. The metaphor is useful because it helps us ask a structured question. If deeper geometry leaves residue in the observable world, which residues become stable patterns? Which traces cancel? Which traces dissolve into noise? Which traces can fit the boundary conditions of the visible slice? Only a few remain. They align with symmetry. They fit the constraints. They resonate. And when they resonate, they become visible as form. This may be why sacred geometry continues to fascinate us, not because ancient diagrams secretly replace science, but because they point toward a question that science also asks. What forms can remain stable? A circle preserves distance from a center. A spiral carries growth through rotation. A lattice repeats local order. A branch distributes flow. These are not merely decorations. They are ways structure solves pressure, growth, motion, and constraint. The ancient eye saw beauty. The modern eye asks, what conditions make that beauty possible? Now the old phrase becomes clearer. 2 gives birth to 3. If 1 is the undivided source and 2 is the tension between visible and hidden, then what is 3? In this episode, we can interpret 3 as a minimum system. Structure, energy, information. Structure is the shape that can hold. Energy is the movement that can change. Information is the difference that can be preserved and read. In the Chladni image, structure is the plate, its shape, its material, its boundary. Energy is the vibration, the motion that pushes the sand away from disorder. Information is the frequency, the specific difference that tells the energy which pattern can hold. Change the structure and the pattern changes. Change the energy and the pattern disappears. Change the information and a different geometry appears. This is why the 3 must work together. Structure gives possibility. Energy gives motion. Information gives direction. Alone, each one is incomplete. Structure without energy is only a frozen blueprint. Energy without structure is only dispersion. Information without either one is only a difference with nowhere to live. But when energy flows through structure and that flow preserves information, a pattern can maintain itself. A snowflake, a vortex, a cell, a melody, a memory, a life. This is one way to understand 3 gives birth to the 10,000 things, not as mythology replacing science, but as a poetic map of how stable relations become worlds. At this point, dangerous questions appear. Was a pyramid ever designed as a giant resonator? Does the double helix of DNA have a deeper electromagnetic role beyond chemistry? Can the geometry of water preserve traces of external vibration? These questions are fascinating, but fascination is not evidence. In this series, we must not turn open questions into conclusions. These ideas belong to a high-risk zone, cultural speculation, unfinished hypotheses, symbolic imagination. They may be worth examining, but they cannot carry the weight of proof. A mature mind can hold 2 things at once. First, many claims around sacred geometry are exaggerated. Second, the human impulse behind them is not foolish. Across history, people have sensed that architecture, life, matter, and the sky may share a deeper grammar of form. Science does not need to mock that impulse, but it must refine it. It must ask, what can be measured? What can be modeled? What can be repeated? What would prove us wrong? Wonder is allowed, but wonder must pass through discipline. This is also where PTQ must remain careful. A speculative framework can open a new way of seeing. It can offer geometric metaphors. It can suggest mathematical questions. It can propose what kind of residue or anomaly might be worth looking for, but it cannot skip the hard work. It still needs equations, boundary conditions, predictions, comparisons with data, possible failure. A beautiful framework is not enough. The universe does not reward elegance alone. It rewards patterns that survive contact with reality. So perhaps the universe is not best imagined only as a machine. The machine image gave science enormous power. It taught us to calculate, to predict, to build, to test. But there is another image we may place beside it. The universe as a self-organizing resonance system, not a mystical choir, not a conscious orchestra, not a mind secretly choosing what becomes real. A system where matter, energy, geometry, and information continually search for stable modes. Galaxies are modes. Snowflakes are modes. DNA is a mode. A living body is a mode. A temporary island of coherence in a sea of change. This is the deeper value of sacred geometry. It does not give us ready-made answers. It gives us a way to notice that form is not trivial, that shape is not decoration, that order can appear without being forced, that beauty can be the visible face of constraint, Worlds do not only consist of things, they consist of relations that hold. A spiral holds a motion, a crystal holds a symmetry, a genome holds a memory, a life holds itself against disorder. Where relation becomes stable, form begins. Lao Tzu said, "The Tao gives birth to one, one gives birth to two, two gives birth to three, three gives birth to the 10,000 things." We are not using this as a physics equation. We are using it as a map of attention, from source to difference to relation to world, from silence to tension to resonance to form. And if this map is useful, it is because it helps us ask better questions. Not what secret symbol controls the universe, but what kinds of relation can survive long enough to become real. And this leads to the next mystery. If the universe can form stable patterns, then what are we? A human being is not only matter, not only energy, not only information. We are a pattern that senses pattern, a structure that remembers, a flow that chooses, a living system that can turn the universe back into an image inside itself. This does not mean consciousness controls reality. It does not mean thought bends the cosmos. It means consciousness may be the most difficult pattern we know, and perhaps in geometry, topology, and self-organization, we may one day find its mathematical shadow. Next time, we enter the most dangerous part of the bridge, geometry and consciousness. Not to claim that physics has already solved the mind, not to claim that thought creates the universe, but to ask a sharper question. Can the core features of consciousness, perception, memory, choice, imagination, and reflection be understood as patterns of organization? Can mind have a geometry? And if reality is partly a projection, what does it mean for one projected pattern to look back and ask where the projection comes from?